Russia is an adversary state. They have decided they were going to be an adversarial state. They have done actions against the United States, which in any other circumstance, if it had been 10 years ago, would have been war. You know, an intrusion of the magnitude that they did, trying to choose a candidate, that would have been treason 10 years ago. But we're in a different world now.
Hi everyone, I'm Ian Bremmer. This is your GZero world. I'm here in New York this week. We've got Malcolm Nance. In just a moment, we're going to be talking about Russia, cybersecurity, things that go bump in the night and other times of the day. He's a great expert and he's an awful lot of fun. But first, your GZero world this week. And I want to start off with Myanmar. And the ethnic Rohingya, they live in the poorest state in Myanmar, 78% unemployment, or I should say they lived there, about 400,000 of them now streaming out, refugees in Bangladesh. Why? Ethnic cleansing. The Myanmar government says that they're actually burning down their own villages. Why would they want to do that? They wouldn't. They're lying. And Aung San Suu Kyi, who is a Nobel laureate, is not coming to the United Nations General Assembly in New York this week because she doesn't want to take the criticism. Even the Dalai Lama is going after on this. It's hard. Your civilian government, the military is actually calling the shots, but she needs to be much stronger on this issue. It's an enormous human rights concern and one, frankly, the world is not paying much attention to. I hope we can get some more people coming out and publicly on what's just a devastating turn of events. And now for something different. The German elections. Coming up in just a week, they are probably the most boring elections we've had in a major economy in a couple of years. Merkel's been chancellor since basically World War II. She's going to win again easily. Martin Schulz, running against her, has already talked about what he would require in terms of policies to join a coalition. Usually you wait until after you lose to say that. In this case, the safe bet he's down by over 15 points. It's good to have Merkel still running that country. The economy's doing well, and she wants a stronger Europe. She wants more integration. So does Macron in France. You certainly want a steady hand to handle those Brexit negotiations going badly. One other thing to watch, though, aside from the party coalition politics, because so many parties will be in the mix, and that is the Eurosceptic Alternatives for Deutschland party. They're not doing well, they're in single digits, but they're going to get seats. And when they get seats, they're going to be much more important in their official position. Being able to make a difference in German politics helps set the agenda. People aren't paying attention to that yet, but they certainly will. To another vote, the Kurds, who are about to have a referendum on independence in Iraq. They're the stateless people in the Middle East. There are lots of them in Syria, in Turkey, and Iran. But Iraq is the one place where they actually have real solid control of a territory, and of course the Iraqi government, central government, not what it used to be. So they have some room. The only government out there that has said good idea for them to have this referendum is Israel. They don't actually have a lot of allies across the Middle East. This isn't going to go badly for them. They don't really want to use it to declare independence. They want to use it to have a lot more influence. And they have Kurds even in the United States making a difference. In Nebraska, for example, you can see this picture that shows Kurds arguing for independence right on the Capitol. I mean, how can you keep them on the farm when they've already seen Erbil? At the end of the day, the Kurds will get a state long term, but for this vote, there's not that much to see. And then finally, Texas Senator Ted Cruz inadvertently liked a porn video on his Twitter account. Only had it up for a few hours, then took it down. That's good, because any longer and he'd have to ask his doctor. He actually said it was his staff that made him do it. I'm sure that's true. Not something I'd normally make a deal out of, except for the fact that this is the same Ted Cruz that argued back when he was a state attorney that you did not have due process for onanism. I think Ted Cruz would argue that one a little differently now. Now, to your big interview. Malcolm Nance here, good friend. Plot to Hack America, latest book, making the rounds. He is top analyst on terrorism, security intelligence for MSNBC. Lots of things to talk about with my friend Malcolm. Maybe start on the cyber side. Tell me, is the United States a cyber superpower? Are we the cyber superpower, the way that sort of we are in lots of other areas?
That's a good question, because
shocking, I know.
You would never know whether we're a cyber superpower, because organizations like the National Security Agency and now the U.S. Cyber Command, which has been separated from NSA, they're not going to tell you. But I can tell you this, all right? When I worked at the National Security Agency, we were at least 10 years ahead of whatever technologies were present in the market.
And that was when?
That was
that
was some time ago.
Okay. And
20 years ago. But now we're certainly cyber superpower. The thing is that we're like Superman, right? We don't use our powers for evil. We always use our powers for good. But there are other nemesis out there, right? Like the Russians. The Russians are seemingly a global cyber, power in terms of, the way they deploy their operations, because they use it like we butter bread in the morning. And we put a little device in the Keurig machine, we press the button, coffee comes out. That's how they use cyber warfare in Russia. In the United States, National Security Agency, or now Cyber Command, they're like a sniper who personally hand makes 5 bullets. And they'll, get a titanium rolled bullet head of 190 grams, and they'll measure in every little piece of propellant powder, and they'll only build 5 bullets. They will test fire 3 of those. They will keep 1 for the mission and 1 in reserve for the museum. And then we will use that cyber weapon that way, like a sniper's bullet, once every 10 or 15 years.
Now, I mean, there are lots of different ways one can deploy cyber. I've seen Russian officials recently talking about the fact that they should start throwing out some of the compromise that the Russians have on Trump and the administration right now. How much of a threat? I mean, you wrote this book on the Russian hacks, but if I ask you about Russia today,
right,
vis-a-vis the United States,
right,
do you think their principal threat to us is about cyber?
I think their principal threat is more, it's less cyber, because cyber is just a weapon system.
Right.
All right, it's a vehicle, it's a platform in which they deploy their ideology, they deploy, their offensive capabilities through compromat, by compromising information, and they can also knock down infrastructure systems and take away, people's baby photos. But on the other hand, they have something we don't have. And this is an overarching strategy from the Kremlin down about what they're doing and what they're about. Vladimir Putin has set the pace for who they are. We don't do that. We're a democracy. It's messy. I mean, look, we're having this start and stop fits of going backwards and forwards through progress. Go back to 1965, move forward to 2017. Russia doesn't have that today. They're essentially a dictatorship. And although you're a real Russian expert and old Sovietologist, right? I mean, but if you look at the way Putin has now organized that government, all right, it's solely designed to execute his will for what he thinks is the good of Russia. Everyone else is either going to be used, they're either going to be exploited, they're either going to be taken down. And I think what's happening with the DNC hacking and all the activities that are going on with Donald Trump is that they are actually executing a long-range plan.
Is there any reason to believe that they have any less information on the Republicans than they do at the Democrats?
Oh no, they have everything they want on the Republicans. It's like at Fort Meade. It's like NSA or the CIA. When we want something on you and you want to dedicate the money to get it, you will get it. All right? And the Russians definitely. There's no way they haven't gone into those servers or gone into the individual emails. They just chose not to exploit it because they needed to weaponize that information to damage the party that they needed out of power.
So given that they have the strategy, given that they've devoted the effort, given that they have the money, do you think it behooves us to try to build a better relationship with Russia these days?
Yeah, it's always, yes, but I mean, this is like, that's like saying, given that Hitler is risen to power, given that Hitler is making moves throughout Europe.
You like making Nazi analogies.
I do,
in a way that you should stop.
I'm sorry, but it's that old, grew up in an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood in Philadelphia in me.
That's the first thing I think of when I think of Malcolm Nance.
You should. Hebrew is the first language I learned, actually Yiddish. Hebrew alphabet was the first thing I ever decrypted, was Yiddish newspapers.
Malcolm Nance, Macher, you heard it here first.
You heard it?
Yes, that's
so,
right.
But that being said, what I think we have to constantly try to build good relationships globally. We have to constantly try to push diplomacy as our principal point of engagement, as opposed to Defense Department acting as global diplomats at the with threats of war or other types of asymmetric operations. Despite the fact that Russia does that on a minute-to-minute basis, we have to constantly do that. The world was not built after World War II in order to be a world of war, even though war has been prevalent all the time. All right, it was designed to try to work through peace and diplomacy, which is why we have that awesome building, down on the East River over there. That being said as well, Russia is an adversary state. They have decided they were going to be an adversarial state. They have done actions against the United States, which in any other circumstance, if it had been 10 years ago, would have been war. A hacking of the magnitude, an intrusion of the magnitude that they did, trying to choose a candidate, that would have been treason 10 years ago. But we're in a different world now. We have to understand that even though they're a strategic adversary, that doesn't mean we have to be, malicious towards each other. They have their goals. They will be malicious as they see fit.
We talk about Russia for hours, and I could push you back on some of this, but I want to know, when you see the constellation of concerns and threats to the U.S., do you think in this avenue, is Russia the principal concern? I know China does different things against the U.S., primarily industrial espionage. Do you see China as a more profound threat in terms of cyber and intelligence gathering? Do you increasingly see organizations like WikiLeaks, like terrorist organizations? How do you rank? If you're devoting resources from the United States, from the NSA and the defense community, how do you start prioritizing where they need to go?
Well, if we're talking about state versus state cyber operations, China is a massive organization. They have a massive operation. They though generally focus on intelligence collection. Their operations, they don't plan on taking down United States infrastructure and then test those systems like we've seen the Iranians and the South Koreans do a little bit. Not South Korea, sorry, North Korea do a little bit. Yeah. But Russia, they have integrated these activities into their day-to-day defense, intelligence, and diplomacy operations. If they can see an opportunity to steal something, to change a balance in some other state, and it comes from the United States, or the U.S. company, a German, parliamentarian, they don't care anymore. They've essentially weaponized cyber to be a fundamental component of their active intelligence operations, or as they call it, active measures. So it's almost like they are so good at this now that they can replace human intelligence to a certain extent in terms of their active measures. So no longer will you go out and buy a trade union, right, and drop a billion rubles into them and try to influence an election. You just go out and you just steal everything there is about your opponents and you just smatter it against the wall, and you use free speech and democracy against democratic nations. It's sort of brilliant if you think about it, because it's cheap.
We're hitting ISIS. We're hitting them to the point that they no longer have a functional caliphate on the ground in Syria and Iraq. Are we going to see a functional caliphate in the internet? And when are we going to start to see a lot more terrorism using these tools, both to get money as well as to destroy?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you a little secret. My actual last book is called Hacking ISIS, and it came out this last March. And it was a study of ISIS's...
such not a secret. It's like the worst kept secret.
Yeah, no one knows this book, Everybody wants the Russian hacking. But it's an analysis and study of ISIS's capabilities over the last few years and how it transitioned from Al-Qaeda and then into ISIS, and how they also touch about in the cyber criminal world. Like, for example, one of the things that very few organizations knew, and I discussed this with an associate of yours recently, was the ad fraud. That's advertising fraud on the internet, where you make yourself
faking a site,
faking
like
a site,
and
like getting legitimate advertisers to put your advertising on there. And every time somebody clicks a button, you get paid a nickel, right? And they were doing this with links to their videos and links to ISIS statements and documents. So every terrorism expert in the world was paying them like a penny or a nickel or a quarter to look at these things. It's just one of those things people didn't consider. But it originated in the Russian advertising fraud world. You know, a Palestinian, a Pakistani, you know, who was working for the Russians, came over and then legitimately set up a legal advertising fraud network because the websites are legitimate, the advertisements are legitimate. It's the purpose for where the money goes once those clicks are all done. It goes to a terrorist organization.
Well, not a surprise that the Americans and the Russians, who are the best at this stuff, are the ones that will ultimately develop the tools that will be used against us.
Sure,
right?
sure.
Yeah.
But you know, we've killed ISIS's most, you know, creative hacker, and he wasn't much of a hacker. He was more like a skitty, right? A script kiddie, a guy who could use executables and things like that. But ISIS right now, because they are dying as a caliphate, they're in their Okinawa moment. They are literally going to start. They are literally blowing themselves up right now. But whatever remains around the world, their followers, their fanboys, they're going to become a ghost caliphate. Whatever leadership still exists will go completely underground. They'll go back to that old Al-Qaeda covert operations model where, you know, you can go to an internet cafe in Peshawar, Pakistan. Worst place to go with internet cafe if you're an ISIS guy. Because we know where all those things are, right? Yeah. Karachi. And when those guys will start to allow the people who are already at home to jihad in place. And all they will do is give spiritual influence and inspiration, and they will build a network of people who will do it themselves, self-starting jihadis. And we're seeing that right now. The attacks in London, on the highways, on the bridges inside of London, we believe that those weren't actually directed attacks. You know, the guys were wearing fake suicide belts. We just had an example of that. All of this is inspirational terrorism. It means people just thunk it up and did it. And that is why we call ISIS's future the ghost jihad. So long as the ideology exists, this cult ideology that they're fighting to bring about the end of times and doing God's will, you won't ever be able to stop it. And
military attacks by themselves are going to do nothing.
Well, I mean,
actually resolve that at the end of the day.
You kill the guys who are their mainframe infrastructure, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram. But the ideology
is there.
Ideology jumps all air gaps, right? And it could be young Christian kids in Peoria who could be just as inspired by this ideology, who think that, okay, that's what gives me meaning in life. And I don't have to go to Yemen and study Arabic, right? The old pathway to becoming an Al-Qaeda terrorist. I can just watch these videos in the comfort of my home, call myself a terrorism researcher, and then get a gun at the Walmart and walk out into a mall, shout Allahu Akbar, and I am now an ISIS member.
You're now an ISIS guy.
As far as ISIS is concerned.
Absolutely. Before we close, I have to ask, it's a very important question. Better euphemism for you. Would it be Malcolm in the middle or Nance in your pants? What do you think?
That's good. I don't know.
What do you think?
You know, I don't know. I sort of fond the Nance in the pants.
Nance in the pants.
But I'm an old sailor.
Go. No, I understand. You know, I mean, we're going to use one or the other, so that's where we're going with this. Look, it's me and Malcolm Nance in your pants. My friend, good to see you.
Good to be here, bro.
Take it easy.
Oh,
look, we got all this stuff. Yeah.